Okay, welcome back, champions. I'm going to talk to you today about how to write comics. So, the specifics I'm going to talk about here is less about how to outline a comic, although I will be showing you a kind of a way that you can start doing that, and it won't be about story structure or really how you can solve the problems in your comics, although I might drop a couple of tips here and there. But this is more how to approach getting a script up and going and how to translate that script into comics pages. I'm going to use Photoshop for now because I'm just going to show you how to do one single page and how I would approach pages. If you really want to know what I use for comics, I love Clip Studio. It's a little pricey for my taste, but I did manage to buy a license way back in the day. I think it was about, I don't know, they had a special going for $65 or something, and I managed to buy sort of a perpetual license for one of them, and I use it all the time. And I especially Clip Studio EX, where you can have an entire book kind of going at the same time. I really like that. But for my first comic ever, I used Photoshop, and Photoshop is a perfectly respectable place to start if you're doing comics. Krita might be a decent place to start as well, because it does also explicitly have some comics tools in it. However, I've never used that before, and this isn't really about how to use software anyway. So let's start on how to write comics. So I'm going to start with, I'm going to show you my script for Troll Girl. I'm not really giving much away in the script because you can literally watch Troll Girl on YouTube. If you go to my website, giantslayer.com, giantslayerstudios.com, excuse me, you'll be able to see the short film, and you'll know exactly what the plot is. However, I am adding a few extra little things in there about the plot to sort of pull out the world. You can see I've got book 1, 2, 3, and 4 over here. I've got about book 1 to 3-ish planned out. Book 4 is still looking very anemic, and I've got kind of a general ideas panel over here. But for now, I'm going to show you book 1 and how I sort of do that. Now, I picked up this format trick from some incredible artists based in Amsterdam called Marlon Spage and Tunde Vollenbroek, who created the book Sisters of the Mist, and they showed us this spreadsheet script idea, which I loved, because normally when I've seen scripts for comic books, they're incredibly overly dense and detailed, and I'm used to looking at something. I've seen stuff, the Alan Moore scripts, for example, where he goes into incredible and exhaustive detail in every single panel. Whereas for me, I'm the artist as well as the writer here. I like to do just a very quick comprehension over the 2 pages. So what they've got here is a page number with all the even number pages and the page number with all of the odd number pages on this side, and then each spread kind of has its own little title, which I love, and I've used those to actually set out what each beat of those 2 pages of the 2-page spread is going to be covering. So I cover everything. So I give the page number 1 to the cover page. That's going to be the cover. The second one, left-hand page, is going to be the inside blank cover page, and then the first page is actually going to be the first one with art. So if you don't know where to start, just give yourself a cover page and give yourself an inside blank cover for your first right-hand and left-hand page. You can figure out the cover page later once you know what the book's actually about. And then you can just kind of go from there. You just work in pairs, really, and you make sure that the pairs are, at least for me, I make sure that the pairs are sort of talking about, they're trying to explore one beat at a time. So the introduction is basically a big old introduction to the world about how the human empire and the fairy empire, the dying fairy empire, are clashing and sort of setting up. And now I zoom into the world and I introduce just a little village within this world, on the edge of this world. And I might do I've talked about here, I've made a bit of an art note about a fresco page or something, where maybe we have we can see the fairy queen on the left, the fairy king on the right, and we see the village right in between them, where the action and the drama is going to play out. So, and you can kind of see, maybe you've noticed here that I'm taking things extremely slowly, where some people might think, no, from the very first page, you've got to have your initial first beat, we've got to be right in the first fight. I want to go in a different direction. I want to take it absolutely slowly. I want to give every story beat a full page to explore. maybe it gets maybe a whole 2 pages to explore. I don't want to. I've done comics enough now that I'm very happy to let a story unfold at its own pace and not feel the need to squash it into a limited limited amount of space. So the very next page there will be the village establishment. The nun will leave the gate. She might exchange a few words with another villager I've called Simon, who's busy harvesting and so on. And I know what those words are about. Those words are about the thing they're going to talk about is the fact that she's going to the edge of the forest and the strange things come from the forest. Strange things happen in the forest, which is also a thing that I've gotten used to doing in storyboarding and filmmaking and so on. I've gotten used to this idea of you take every opportunity to reinforce the things about your world. So if you're oh, these two characters are going to talk about something, what are they going to talk about? They have to talk about something that reinforces the world, reinforces where the danger comes from, what the social expectations are. Simon is going to think it's weird and maybe a little, maybe a little deviant almost for the nun to go by herself to the edge of the forest where strange things come from. What does she think she's doing there? What's gonna does she want someone to come with her? And she says, no, of course I'll be fine. I'm just gonna re-up on a couple of herbs and things. So also establishing that she's a herbalist. She is, that's what she does. So kind of immediately from there, if you're clear on what your world is and you're clear on what the stakes are and what the social norms of your place are, it becomes easy to create conversations between your characters. So we can just kind of go on and on and on here. I go up to about 38 or 39, almost 40 pages is what I've planned out so far. And this is just a plan. It doesn't have to be exact. Maybe I've overestimated or underestimated. As you can see here, the actual, what I was talking about earlier with just making the barest little inference to what's actually going on that page, that helps me because I can figure out the page later, which I'm going to show you how to do. I don't have to figure it all out panel by panel over here. I just give a very brief little explanation for myself down the line, what needs to happen on that page, what I hope to happen. But of course, I could be over or underestimating that. I could be way over and overestimating how long that conversation with Simon will actually take, or way underestimating it, and then I have to go onto another page. And then maybe one little thing about a story beat is a story beat kind of being where a story pivots into, it would be a scene change. Maybe if we're talking in filmmaking languages, I would want the conversation with Simon to wrap up on one page, on the end of the odd page over here. So if I'm opening a book, this is literally me looking at a book, opening a book here, intro to the village, intro to Simon the harvester and the nun and her hobby or her job as a herbalist, Simon's uncertainty about the edge of the forest, the nun sort of brushing him off, saying, no, I'll be fine, everything will be good. I want that to wrap up at the end of this page. I don't necessarily want it to go. I want to move into a different phase over here where the nun is by herself. She's reaching the bridge that takes her to the edge of the forest. We're feeling the potential danger coming from the forest, and how she has to sing herself a little song to keep her spirits up and to keep herself from feeling too afraid of going in there. And this is where, this is where she will find the baby in amongst the forest flora, in amongst the forest flora, and she'll find a baby left there, wrapping up that beat. I should really sort of change this to intro to bridge and flame. I should say finds the baby, because that's the big thing that happens in this beat over here. Finds the baby. Okay, so she gets to the bridge, gets to forest, finds baby. Now maybe I've underestimated how much I'm going to need here, so maybe those two would actually be better splits. So maybe I would do an entire 2 pages just on her kind of being very careful going through the forest, and then the next 2 pages would be about her finding the baby and all of that. But having actually drawn this out somewhere else, I know that those 2 things will fit. You can always go back and correct things in your script and add new things here. If you want to add stuff, it's just as easy as in your spreadsheets, just adding extra rows and stuff. So I add extra rows by, say, grabbing all of these and adding 3 rows above, and then I have to do a little tune up in terms of the colors and things. But otherwise, that's kind of how it works. So that's a quick way that you can script out an entire book. I don't recommend necessarily doing the outline over here. I think an outline should be done. I do my outlines in Notion, or I do it in a place where I can just write a couple paragraphs about what the book is about. And that's where I'm figuring out just the very bare bones of the overall story. This is a little bit too bitty and a little bit too minute in detail to be figuring out an outline. An outline, you really have to step way back and watch and see the whole thing play out in your mind. And if you're trying to outline an entire season arc, maybe how all 4 of these books are going to play together, you have to step even further back. And that might take, I might take even more of, I might want to see all of those paragraphs stacked together, which is what I have Notion for. I can kind of move and shift paragraphs all over the places. I'm not going to show that too much because it might give stuff away about my script. But basically that's how you get a script going. So once you kind of have a script, or this is really maybe the easiest way to sort of plan out your script, but this is a very new development for me. How I used to write scripts was more just going straight in there and doing the thumbnail version of this. So I would go in and script write. Actually, I'm gonna pull up my 9-panel overview. Where is it? Where did I put it? Oh, there we go. I would normally actually go in and do something. This is also for 9 panels, but I'm actually going to treat each of these as pages, where you could very easily just go cover and then write something over here. It's nice and visual. So like sometimes you might write actually what happens on this page, just so you can properly visualize it, and maybe you want to number each of them as you go. But often I would actually go in there and I would actually draw something. And I'm used to drawing very small little hieroglyphs and stuff for my comics and for my storyboarding and so on. So this is quite natural for me as well. But I would want something somewhere where maybe I would want to write out, what actually is happening over here, what's going on over here. So I'm very clear on what needs to happen, because the problem with hieroglyphs is sometimes you only come back to them years later, and if you haven't been absolutely clear with what you wrote, you won't be able to read what your little hieroglyphs are saying and so on. So I don't super recommend hieroglyphs if you are extremely messy with your hieroglyphs, or unless you intend to go straight into doing a fuller drawing for them. But let's assume maybe you've got your script one way or another, whichever way you want to figure them out. Then I kind of go into just a quick lesson on what the anatomy of a comics page is. What we've got here first is our margin, which is very necessary just for printing purposes and that. This isn't very exact. I don't recommend maybe using this as the printing gold standard or anything, but visually it's helpful just to keep things away from the edges, because stuff gets lost on the edges in printing. You don't want to put important stuff on the edges in printing. Then what I've really enjoyed doing lately, I only discovered this a couple of years into doing comics, and that was the 9-panel grid. And the 9-panel grid looks admittedly super boring at first until you realize what it's doing. So I think it was Scott McCloud, who is an incredible comics legend and teacher, and sort of introduced me to the idea of the 9-panel grid through, I think it was through his book Making Comics, which you should absolutely read, and Understanding Comics as well. Just wonderful comics scholar, really breaks it down. You really feel you've got so many tools after reading those books. But yes, so what the 9-panel does, and what's really fascinating about the 9-panel, is that it creates a kind of visual rhythm that your reader comes to rely upon. So the 9-panel can be done with 9 separate panels here, but it can also be done with various types of paneling as well. So you could have panels that look this, or you could kind of cut into those. I'm going to cut into these badly now. You could cut into those so that the grids sit this way. You could do pretty much any kind of configuration that is a combination of these grids that you can think of. And that's kind of the power of it, is that you can stack these, 100 different ways and they would make sense. Not exactly a flow sense, by the way. That's entirely dependent on where you put your dialogue balloons, for example. So if you put a dialogue balloon, if I take a dialogue balloon and I put it, if I have a character over here who's, I don't know, they're giving a big long speech, but their dialogue balloon is down here, then I'm going to be reading what's down here, and my eye is not going to naturally flow to up here. If this is panel 1 and panel 2, where my eye flows is going to be over here to this panel, to the last panel, which is not great. So you do want to be aware of where your dialogue balloons are going, and you kind of want to make sure that your dialogue balloons are sitting in a place that is sort of natural, that when we finish reading whatever this guy's got to say, eye kind of naturally goes over to that panel. These panels, you have to be kind of sure of where your eye is going to go, and make sure that you've got some visual clues for where I don't know, maybe as a character sort of throwing something down there, for example, and then their hand is kind of pointing down there. I don't know. All sorts of visual clues and stuff can be useful here. So that's using the panels. And the great thing about using a panel for this is that if you change the type of panel, if you do a weird sort of panel in the middle here, where, for instance, maybe there's a broken, shattered panel or something here, it really stands out, especially if you've been reading a book where everything is based on this 9-panel grid. That little shatter effect over there means something really important is happening, and it really underpins the moment in your book. So I enjoy that. I enjoy the 9-panel grid for the structure that it gives. I'm sure there's wonderful other ways to sort of do your structures and that sort of thing. I don't know how this would be handled in the manga, for example. I'm not very familiar with the manga way of doing things, and I know that manga artists have kind of an incredible way of making mangas extremely readable to a point where you can finish a 120-page manga in a 20-minute train ride or something. They've just got a way of laying out their books and laying out their artwork and their dialogue balloons and so on in a way that is extremely readable. And I'm not privy to what those secrets are. I don't fully understand what those secrets are. So this is more maybe Western based, how you would do comics. Eventually, I wouldn't go straight into art here. I would start with a thumbnail version. So maybe I have my little thumbnail versions. Where did I put them? So maybe I have these little thumbnail versions here. I could always take one and expand it, perhaps. Yeah. What am I doing? Okay. I could always take one and expand it all over the page and fit the things in here. But really, again, I treat drawing very much as I would treat written note making. So that doesn't super appeal to me as a workflow, but it might to you. Might be the easier way for you to do it. But eventually my thumbed out comics might look something like this, where I've drawn out panel formations, I've drawn out characters. I haven't done a really great job of showing how these characters are different, which is very important when you're doing very basic little star people like this. But I've maybe given them a little W and a D over there, whereas this is that character, this is this character. But maybe you could emphasize it by this, I don't know, so and so has a hairstyle or something like that. So I always know who so and so is because I have this hairstyle kind of going. Other character maybe will always carry a spear or something like that. Just use little ways of figuring out who these characters kind of are, or notate them, or color code them, or do whatever you got to do. But again, make this easier for your future self to be able to tell what is happening and who is doing what. And then I also, because the dialogue balloons are so important in terms of the flow and in terms of the visual story that's being told, I include those as well. So let me take that last one away there. So I include them also in terms of where they sort of sit. So a little tip with dialogue balloons, you maybe don't want to have the dialogue balloons totally covering the eye lines. Or I heard that somewhere, and I keep to it as a way of visually I don't interrupt the eye lines as much as possible. So there's also a thing about don't overwrite and try not to overwrite and try not to be redundant with what you're doing, with what you're saying. The really beautiful thing about comics is being able to contrast your visual and your written work. So trying as much as possible, if you have a guy saying, "Hey, what's over there?" while he's pointing to over there, feels a little redundant, but it's a fantastic way to fill in extra information where maybe a character is reading a paper that the audience is not privy to, and rather than reading over the character's shoulder, the character could summarize for us what's on the paper, where it's a letter from Uncle Mike. He dated it 3 days before he died or something, and now the audience knows exactly what's happening. So it's wonderful little ways in that way that you can control the flow of information in your comics and make sure that you're not being absolutely redundant with what you're doing and how you're putting things. little tip about if you're writing comics, because this actually reminds me of, I was talking to somebody who is at a student at school who's wanting to do a comic on this, and he's kind of going very full on anime with it, where he has literally biblical levels of lore in his comic. And a little tip that I gave him, which I know for myself from doing a comic that's way too freaking long, it's extremely it's extremely long and it's extremely intensive, and it's called Sophie the Giant Slayer, sophiethegiantslayer.co.za. When you have a comic that's getting a little out of control, when you are doing a comic that's just a little bit too much is happening in it, or you have some lore that's you keep this guy was time traveling, and suddenly it's where we're in the past and we're seeing what an ancient, it's a demon that goes from one person to another, and someone's born with this demon thing. It's very anime. It's very typical of a lot of animes and so on, where someone comes along every generation with this curse that'll actually save everybody, kind of thing. But then it starts to go into further generations where it's back into the past and into the future. So one thing I can give you there as a writer of comics is, unless you are pretty good at doing a Game of Thrones style historical writing situation where you're changing perspectives the entire time and you can handle a cast of millions, I would give yourself a rule for your story, that the story only happens to one person, or this person happens to be the person who sees the length and breadth of the stories in this world, that sees the length and breadth of all of the possible happenings in this world. That's why they're the hero. Sometimes because they are the most powerful, but also sometimes because they have the whole story. Your hero gets to have the entire story, and they get to be on site when the important stuff happens that's affecting their story. So this you could totally do a time travel sort of storyline or something, where someone goes back, or they have a vision, or they see this person gets into a position where they see what the secrets of the past are and how that gives context to the current day, and it helps them in some way. But try and find a way to have your main character be on the spot constantly. Otherwise the story's going to get away from you, and you're honestly never going to get your comic done. So that's how to write a comic. I would also really recommend that you go through each process as a pass. So don't start this process over here before you've done. This is my comic, by the way, Sophie the Giant Slayer. I'm very proud of it. It's almost finished. I'm busy with. I have 4 chapters up. Chapter 5 is on its way, but all 4 chapters are up at the moment. So dig in. But yeah, what I was talking about before in terms of working in passes, this is the way to work fast in storyboarding, in filmmaking, and in comics work. The way you work, the way you finish actually what you're doing, is you work from beginning to end. Whatever pass you start, if you start here, finish this. If you start with an outline, finish the outline first. Don't just hair off at the first sign of a good plot point. Just finish what you're doing. Finish your entire scripting process. Then from there, go on to whatever you want to do here. From there, go on to your smaller thumbnails if you want to, or go right into your bigger thumbnails if you want to. But don't move on from here and start cleaning up artwork before you've got this part of the process done. And the reason you want to do that is purely psychological. If you know that you've only got one plot point figured out, you are going to start looping. You are going to start spiraling, and you are going to start finishing and finishing and refinishing and refinishing this one page, and you will never move on from this page. You will just have a beautifully, perfectly polished page that no other comic page will ever measure up to, and you will give yourself a standard that you for the entire book that you can't meet, and that will stall you, and that will stop you from finishing your comic. So sometimes you've got to, when you're doing big sequential art projects, doing a short film or doing a full comic that might be 40, 50, 150 pages long, I highly recommend you start with maybe a 5-pager and move up from there, because a 5-pager can teach you as much as a 50-pager. Don't make your life difficult and start with a 500-page epic, even though I know you're going to anyway. You've been warned. But give yourself, when you are taking on a large sequential art project, you have to trade in perfect for done. You don't get to do perfect and done unless you've got, you want to spend years of your life on a single project. You have to give yourself a standard that you can meet across each and every page. So doing something this way, figuring something out step by step and pass by pass allows you to do that. There's no You can obviously take a page and tweak it as much as you, but if you want a project that you will finish at the end of the day, you have to approach it in passes, and you have to move on from your first page. You have to give yourself some runway by knowing that you've got an entire book you can finish. This is why at this point in my life, having done a 4-chapter thing, Sophie the Giant Slayer, I'm kind of reluctant to get into fully drawing these books actually until I've got all of my books figured out. Until I've got all of my books figured out there, because I don't even want that loop 4 books down the line. I don't want to get to the end of the series and not know how to end the series. It's taken me 5 years to get to the point where I can finally finish Sophie the Giant Slayer, because now I know how to end that story. And I don't want the same for Troll Girl. I want to kind of have Troll Girl kind of almost entirely mapped out, even though mapped out is not the same as perfected. I want to have it mapped out as much as possible before I start even properly drawing it. Even though with at least 2 of these books, I have gotten to the stage where I have mapped it out like this. I've drawn it out like this. And this I still consider the writing stage. It's not necessarily the art stage for me. The art stage for me, honestly, is more boring than the writing stage. Or it's more settled, because by the time I've gotten here, this is basically done in my mind. It's not done. It may well change in the art phase as well, but it will change a lot less because I've done so much initial excavation and initial work on a comic series. So that's how to write comics. Let me know what your comics ideas are, how you're approaching writing your comics. If you use any of these tools, I would love to know. I would love to see it. And take care.